Hello everyone, Steve Angel here with Traditional Outdoors, and this is the first in our series of scouting and cyber scouting videos that we're going to be doing. I wanted to start really with the tool that I use the most. It's my go-to tool. Whenever I'm looking at a new piece of property or a new piece of public land, I almost always start with this particular tool. It is a free service, and basically what CalTopo is a collection of various topographical maps with the legends removed that they then put together and formed a full view of the United States, and it may even go beyond the United States, but that's really all I'm focused on. I say it is free, and for the majority of people, I would recommend that's all you're ever going to need is the free functionality. But there are additional capabilities that you can choose to pay for. I will start out by saying I think everybody should start with a free version, and if you start running into limitations or you're wanting to do more with the service, that's when you should upgrade. So let's just jump right in here, and we'll kind of start basic. Just keep in mind that we're not going into a lot of detail in this video. I really just want to introduce you to the site, the tool, show you a little bit of information about it, and then let you get your feet wet, start playing around with this yourself, getting more familiar with it, and then we'll build on what we're going to do here in future videos. There's going to be probably 3 or 4 of these around the basic tools, and then we'll start putting everything together. So the first thing here is the signing in. You'll notice you can sign in with Google, Yahoo, Facebook, or a Microsoft account. So you don't have to create an account here. It's going to use an email address that you already have. And really the signing in just lets you save information that you've created on a specific map. So I can go in here and do anything I want to here without ever even signing in. The problem is if I leave the website and come back, everything that I save is now going to be gone. So you'll want to log in. I'm going to show you first an account that I don't pay for. So this is the free account. This is what you would start with. If I go in here and look at my account at the status, you'll see that the current level is free. I can save up to 5 private maps. Now keep in mind the 5 private maps can be as big as you want them to be. You could do an entire state if you wanted to, or more. There's no size limitation, and you can save up to 5 different ones. The PDFs, I don't use a lot, but if you wanted to save a map and then create a PDF of that map that you could print, you can do up to 8.5 by 11 size sheets and 5 sheets per PDF. Again, I don't use this much. This was not the reason I upgraded. The 256 tile KMZ exports is the reason I upgraded. I save a lot of KMZ exports out of CalTopo. If you're not familiar with what a KMZ file is, it's basically a file format that allows you to save mapping data, and then you can import that data from one format or from one application to another. So in this case, I may save a KMZ export from CalTopo and then import that into Google Earth or Garmin Basecamp, etc. And we're going to show you how to do some of those things and how that can play into your overall scouting strategy. But for now, just understand that you can only do up to 256, and that is a lot. And I want to say that is based on an annual recurring basis. So you're not limited to 256 total, but maybe 256 per year. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I think that's the way it works, because when you're paying for a subscription, you're paying by the year annually. So real quickly, I'm going to log out of this account and I'm going to log in with my paid account. And there's a couple things I'll show you here, and then we'll actually get into using the tool. So if I come in here, you'll see that I have 10 maps saved. If I click on my account and the status, you'll see that I am using the basic, which is 20 private maps and 800 KMZ exports. And that's really, again, the big one here. I'm not going to do a lot with overlays and layers, and we're not even going to talk about it much here because I don't think you really need it. So doesn't matter. Again, I would just state that if if you choose to use this tool, start with the free account, and if you run into a limitation, then upgrade. Otherwise, there's no reason to upgrade. So I'm going to select this Rich Mountain private map that I've saved. I haven't hunted this track but a couple of times, and we're just going to use this as our basis to kind of walk through and show you what all this information is and what you can do here. So I mentioned that this is a collection of various maps, and I want to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about that because not all topo maps are created equal. There are different levels of detail within various topo maps that you may or may not need or want to see. So play around with these different types of maps or the different layers that CalTopo provides you. I'm going to show you the ones that I don't use a lot, and I'll show you the ones that I do use a lot. But ultimately, try them out, see which ones you like the best. It sure doesn't cost you anything to play around with this. So spend a little time familiarizing yourself with each and then decide which ones you like best. When you look at so we'll go to the top down here, the 7.5 topo maps, in my experience, is going to give you the least amount of detail as you're looking through these. If we scroll way out, you can start to see these different colored squares. These are all USGS survey maps, so they're taken over different periods of time, different resolutions or topographical intervals. So contour intervals, there's a lot of different changes in some of these maps, why you're seeing the different colors here and so forth. So you may even want to look at different maps layers based on locations just to see one may look better than the other in a specific area. And let me zoom in here a little bit and I'll try to show you what I'm talking about. So here is a real good example. Now, here's 4 different map quadrants that come together in this corner. They're all on the same 7.5 topo maps, but look at the difference here. If I scroll in, look at the amount of detail, and there's obviously not that much difference from a terrain perspective between here and here. But what you'll see is you've got a lot fewer topo lines. This is a 40, I can't see it, but I can almost guarantee you that what you're seeing here is this map is a 40-foot contour interval, which means every one of these lines that you see, there's a 40-foot change in elevation. Now, if you look at this one, you'll see there's a lot more lines, there's a lot more detail because this is a 20-foot contour interval map, which means every one of these lines represents a 20-foot change in elevation. So you just want to play around with the different maps and see which one's going to give you the best resolution and the most detail. Forest Service map has generally gotten to be the one that I rely on the most. It's generally the most consistent and provides the most consistent amount of detail. So I typically fall back to the Forest Service map. We're going to come back to this one in a minute because of that reason, but I do want to go through the other ones available. So the aerial topo, what that's actually doing is trying to give you some satellite imagery with the contour lines also embedded. It's a good tool. I just don't use this in CalTopo. I've got some other ways that I do this same thing that gives me a lot more control over what I'm seeing. So we're going to save this for a future video, but I will show you how I do this using Google Earth and some other resources. The hybrid satellite, kind of the same thing, gives you that aerial view, but with the topo lines. Again, this to me is too busy and it doesn't serve a lot of purpose for myself. If you like it, great. You may enjoy or find that you like using this more than some of the others, but I don't use it a lot. Slope angle shading. This used to be my default map, and I use this map more than anything else. And I've since gone to the Forest Service maps, and we're going to go back to that in a minute. But I wanted to spend a second talking about slope angle shading and what it is. And if you'll see here, you've got this yellow turning into red markings all over this map. And that's showing me at a glance that this is a very steep incline. There's a lot of elevation change here in a very short distance. And for a hunter, that tells me two things. First and foremost, there's probably going to be a natural funnel created either above or below this slope angle shading, and probably both. So I'm probably, at some point in time, I will look at this just to see what kind of sign I'm seeing here. Probably not along the river, but maybe. But I'm definitely going to be looking at this. The other thing it does for me as a hunter is if I set up or choose a site that I'm going to hunt, I'll spend some time studying and researching the best approach, a route to take to get to that stand that's going to stand the less chance of blowing everything out of the area, as well as the least amount of chance that an animal is going to cross my path. And if I'm planning an approach route, I don't want to come straight up something like this. Likewise, when I'm scouting, I don't want to try to walk straight up this steep grade. So what I may do is I may plan my route to come up this little valley here or something like that, where I can come around and then get on top of it and so forth. So I really like slope angle shading, and I use it a lot. Now, if I go back to my Forest Service map, the first thing you'll notice is there is no slope angle shading available on this map. However, over here to the right side, you'll see if I hover over the base map type, and you'll see this is based off of that 7.5 topo map, but it adds a layer for the Forest Service topo of 2016, which is where we get some of that additional detail. So this is where the layers concept comes into play, and we're going to talk about this a lot when we start looking at Google Earth. But you'll see we've got the Forest Service topo overlaid the 7.5 U.S. Geological Survey maps. Now, if we come down here and look at these other overlays, you can see I've got 40-foot contours we could turn on, which this is a 40-foot contour map, so it'll do nothing. We've got a map builder overlay. I don't use it, but look here, slope angle shading. Now, if I select that, now I've got my slope angles on top of the Forest Service map. There's some other things here that you may want to play around with: fire history, land management, sun exposure. I don't really mess with those a whole lot. And as far as the weather, I'm looking at other sites for weather. We may or may not talk about some of those, but this is really the only one that I use a lot, but I do use this one quite a bit. So play around with all these, see which ones you like. And just keep in mind that everything I'm showing you here, we're going to build upon in future videos. Okay, so now that you've got an account, you've found a location you want to look at, now what can you do with this tool? You'll see here, I've got a Rich Mountain archery range marker on this map. Now this is a marker that I created. If I come over here and click on edit, I can bring up a little window here that'll show you what it is. Shows you the coordinates, shows you what I named it, and the style of marker I chose. But this is one that I created, and there is an archery range that kind of lays in this general area here. If I want to create another marker, let's say I'm looking at this from a scouting perspective, and I'm planning some areas that I want to put boots on the ground to look at. So knowing a topo map, and we're going to probably spend a whole episode just talking about reading a topo map, but for the purpose of this, I want to keep it pretty basic. I know that this is a hill or a small mountain or a knoll or whatever you want to call it, and I can tell that because I've got this last circle here at the top. And each one of these contours that go out can tell me what the shape of this hill looks like without ever being on the ground. So the first thing that I can notice looking at this is I can see that these little lines with the indention here, where the indention's pointing up, is telling me this is a valley or a little draw. It's not much, but it's a little. And might be something, if I wanted to get on top of here, I might use this as an access. But more importantly, from a scouting perspective, what I see is the opposite over here, where I can see these lines pointing or dipping down. This tells me that there is a ridge that runs right through here, which I might want to look at. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to add object, and you'll see you've got a lot of different objects, and predominantly the two we're going to use the most is marker and line. So I'm going to start with a marker, and for those of you that are familiar with using a GPS, this would be the same thing as a waypoint on a GPS. Now once I've created that, I can come over here and I can hover my mouse till I get my finger pointing at that little dot, which can be a little bit frustrating at times. But then I can select that and I can drag this wherever I want to go with it. So I'm going to bring it up here and I'm going to drop it about right there. So then I can name it, and I usually name mine POI for point of interest, and then I'll give it a number, or I may give it a little bit more information such as initial for the track I'm looking at, whatever. You'll come up with your own naming convention, but anything that I start with or have POI, I know that's just a point of interest. It's something I want to look at, and here I might put ridge. So it's just something that I know I want to look at, and I create a waypoint, and I'll move this between various different pieces of software to get some different views and so forth. And ultimately, it'll end up on my GPS if it's something I decide I want to look at. Now, I also know that based on the distance between these two, I might want to look either here or I might want to look here for a shelf or a bench. Most likely, I'm going to find it here. And most likely, I'm going to see a trail somewhere in this area just based on what I've seen in the past. So I may want to come in here, and this is a very basic example. Keep that in mind because this is close to where I'm going to be parking, but think of the bigger picture here. So let's say I want to create my route and I want to make those green, whatever. Now I can come in here and I select a starting point, and now I will carry this line till I get up here on this, what I hope to be a shelf that I want to look at. And then each time I click on my mouse, I'm creating a stopping point or a change in direction. So I may come down through here and now I stop. Now I've created a line that shows my, so I'm just going to say route POI 001. So now I've got a route to that number one point of interest. I click save here, and now you'll see I've got an object over here as well. So this is what's called a line in CalTopo, but I can turn this into a track or a route later that I can use in my GPS. So if this was a much bigger distance, I might have, it might be a mile. I'll give you an example. In Wyoming, I'm probably going to be creating a route or track there that'll be 6 miles in length that'll get us from the trailhead to where we're actually wanting to set up our base camp. So they can be short or long, but just keep in mind, if I was doing a scouting trip, I might have a 4-mile line that's a track that just takes me from one point to the next that I want to investigate closer. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. I would say, create you a map, play around with it, create some markers, create some lines on the map. And one other thing I'm going to show you here in a minute, you may want to also use these lines to create your own boundary around a piece of property. But I'm going to show you how you can avoid that. But let's just say, as you'll notice here, there is no boundary around this WMA. You can't see where it starts or stops. So you could find another map that has that boundary, and you could potentially freehand and get that pretty close on the map to create your own boundary. But we're going to talk about imports and exports here in just a second. I want to show you what you can potentially also do with that capability. So now that I've created these 2 points of interest, and again, most cases I'm going to have a lot more on the map than this, but now I can come up here, and we talked about those KMZ exports. So if I want to do an export that contains this data, I can come here to export, and I can choose download KML file. And you'll see it's got all these different, now these are ones we haven't looked at because it's actual locations that I've saved in the past. So we're going to focus on this point of interest, the archery range, and the route to that point of interest. And if I click export, it's going to create a KMZ file that I can now open up and import into other pieces of software. I can use it with Google Earth, which I do quite a bit. I can even use it in Garmin Basecamp and get that information to my GPS. The other capability you have here is with an import. Now, I mentioned here, and I'm going to scroll this out just a little bit, you can't see a boundary for this WMA track on this map. Now, some topo maps will have boundaries, especially if the WMA or the public land has been established for a long time. But just keep in mind that those, especially if it shows up on a topo map from the 70s, the boundaries may have changed. They could have been reduced, they could have been added, they could have shifted. So keep that in mind. If you're using that based on an older topo map, you probably want to do what I'm getting ready to show you and go in and find a new boundary, or again, create your own on that map so that you've got a point of reference for where that public property starts and stops. But what I can tell you is for Georgia, and there are other states that do this as well, for Georgia, I can go to the Georgia DNR page and I can actually download a KML file from the Georgia DNR that has all of the boundaries for all of the public parcels in the state of Georgia. I can then import that file into Google Earth, and don't worry, we're going to go through all this when we cover Google Earth, but I can import that into Google Earth and I can expand it, and I can see each one of these lines that have been created to form the boundary on that map. So it may have a couple hundred of those in the file, but I can then go in and select a boundary specific to a piece of property that I'm wanting to scout look at. And I've done that here. So if I go in and do import and choose files, this is a file that I have already exported from Google Earth from that larger file that I downloaded from the Georgia DNR website. And this one is just the boundary for this one tract that we're looking at now. So if I click open here, it's going to ask me if I want to import this into the file, and I'm going to click import. Now this will take us a few minutes for it to import that into the CalTopo server and then paint it on the page. But when it does, what you're going to see is you're going to see the boundary for this entire WMA, and there it is, appear on this map. And now I know where that boundary exists. So as long as I'm putting waypoints inside of this boundary, there's a very good chance that I'm going to be on public property. Now this brings up the topic of OnX maps, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that. We will do a video on OnX maps. It is a great product. I highly recommend it. I own OnX maps for 3 states. But if someone is on a budget, or if they're really only concerned with trying to identify public land boundaries, you can do that with free tools that are available to you in most cases. So just keep that in mind. But that's pretty much the end of this video. As you can see there, we've got the entire boundary with just a simple import. Now I know where that is at. The last thing I'll show you is we saved all of this information. So we saved a point of interest, we saved a route, and we saved this boundary. If I come in here and sign out of this map, and even if I were to close that tab and go back to CalTopo, and now we're at the base map again. If I sign in with that account again, everything that I've done to that map is going to be saved for me. And this is the reason why you want to create an account and actually save a map, so all of this information is saved, and there you can see it is there as well. So that's pretty much going to cover it for this video. We're going to again get into more detail. I'll show you some more things that you can do with these markers and the lines within CalTopo, and we're also going to be doing a similar video around Google Earth as well as Garmin Basecamp as well. So stay tuned for those. Until then, I hope you enjoy this video and hope you'll start putting it to some use and get out there and start preparing for your fall hunting season. Until the next time, take care.